here today to talk to you about the power of yes, because I believe you should say yes to everything you possibly can. I am not a motivational speaker, I'm a television producer, but my whole life I have said yes. To me, saying yes means learning, it means growing, and it means doing. It means being open to endless personal and professional experiences, some of which I'll tell you about. It means risking failure a lot, but it means being successful in every sense of the word. It seems like such a simple idea, but I believe if you can say yes rather than no, you can really change your world, and you can change the world of others around you. I said yes early on to joining the Oyster River Otters, the local swim team, and yes to early morning practices at 5 a.m. before school. And I tell you this because all those endless laps and endless hours in the pool, in the frigid cold waters, taught me so much about myself. It taught me that if you're open to try something new and you're really open to hard work, that anything is possible. And that confidence and that experience helped me apply to a tough college, and then after graduation to move from a small town in New Hampshire to New York City. Shortly after arriving in New York City, a friend suggested that we run the New York City Marathon. There were many reasons to say no to this, really good reasons. Among them being that I had never run more than 10 miles. But instead I said yes, and we ran it, and it led to my first job in television. I know this because the woman that was interviewing me looked past my college, looked past my internship experience, and went right to the bottom and said, clearly you can run tapes around New York City. And that is what I did. And from there, I worked at many television shows. And at each and every one, I did my best to say yes every time I could. And this was especially true at my last job at the Colbert Report. And the great thing about the show is that Stephen and the show itself were also incredibly open to possibilities and opportunities within the world. He often called the show the joy machine. We tried to approach everything with a real sense of adventure and joy. One of the great things when I was thinking about this talk is that one dictionary definition of the word yes is a strong expression of joy, pleasure, and approval. As part of our show, one of the things that we did and accepted and said yes to and took a risk on was when we were invited to take our show to Iraq in 2009. We agreed to do this despite all the substantial risks and the obstacles and challenges that this involved. So we ended up going and producing 4 shows and broadcasting them from a war zone, which was a first. Among the many obstacles that we faced, the first one was trying to convince all the top military leaders that we should be able to produce our show in the middle of the Afab Palace, in the middle of their command center. So we flew over on a scout, and after 8 hours of walking around in the desert and dirty, we walked in and somehow explained to them that even though our show was going to be taped about 10 feet outside their offices, that it was not going to be loud at all. And they let us do it. We also had a huge shipment of supplies that we had to send over to Kuwait, things that we needed to tape the show. And the courier misdirected those supplies. And I got a call one morning from a very angry sergeant on a base in Kuwait who threatened to send all of our supplies back, which would mean we couldn't do the show because they wouldn't make it back in time. So with the promise of cigars, we got him to keep those there. And we faced many other challenges along the way. One being when we, right a week before we were going, there was the avian flu that was sweeping the whole country. And the USO called me to say, the Kuwaiti government now is requiring that everyone that comes into their country needs to be checked at their health clinics before you go out, which would have meant adding a couple days to our whole trip, which we did not have. And as you can imagine, it's really not hard to get a government to make an exception, but we did. when we got there, the only way we could do the shows was to have troops and soldiers assigned to us to help us. And we really were met with open arms, and they helped tremendously. However, there were a few skeptics when we first got there. And there was one woman who we nicknamed Mouse because of her small size and her very big bite. The very first day we arrived, we all forgot to wear our credentials, and she yelled so loudly that I think I can still hear her in the back of my mind. And she also gave me keys to an office at the palace, and then threatened that if I lost them, then I would never leave the base and go back and see my family. But at the end of the 10 days on our last show, we needed a muffler for a prop. And it was Mouse that went out back and risked being reprimanded and took the muffler off her own car and gave it to us. And so ultimately, she said yes to us, and it was really one of our greatest stories there. Another thing that we, faced there was there was a sandstorm. There were 20-hour days. We had to move from our condemned trailers. We only had a third of the people that we needed to do what we needed to do. And then on the very first night, my favorite part was after all of our efforts, our printer wouldn't work. And so a printer almost sabotaged all of our efforts in Iraq. It's always the printer. But ultimately, it really was a life-changing experience. And it was worth it all in the end, because we shared an experience that we will never forget. Another thing that I was privileged to be part of at the Colbert Report was our coverage of super PACs. And as many of you know, super PACs, these are some more pictures of Iraq. This is when the 4-star general shaved Stephen's head to make him feel part of them. And to this next slide. As many of you know, super PACs are political action committees that allow you to raise unlimited amount of funds and spend those unlimited amount of funds. And our show decided that this was something that was interesting to learn about and talk about, because campaign finance affects how elections are won and lost. So, of course, Stephen decided that to do it, because the way you learn is by actually doing something. So he said we should actually start our own super PAC, which of course meant that I should actually start our own super PAC, which I did. And along the way, we learned that, first of all, we learned that the Viacom attorneys and lobbyists did not think it was such a great idea. They said no a lot at various turns. Ultimately, they allowed us to do the show that we wanted to do, but which was a great thing, because it really did show that attorneys, can even say yes sometimes. But as we did it, we also wanted the people that were watching the show to really, be involved and be part of it as well. So we decided to create super PAC fun kits, and these would allow people and show people how easy it is to start a PAC. And so hundreds of people across the country, mostly young college students, did just that. They started their own PACs. And then also, of course, these people sent us all of their hard-earned money for us to invest in our PAC. And as it turns out, we weren't quite sure what we were doing, but we figured it out along the way. One of the things that we learned is that we should hire our own attorney, and we did so, a man named Trevor Potter here. And what he taught us is, he taught us all about the rules of the FCC, the FEC, the IRS, and everything else. But one thing is, when Stephen decided to run for the President of the United States of South Carolina, he explained to us that that Stephen could transfer the powers of his PAC to his good friend Jon Stewart, and he did just that. And this is where it's happening now. And just like politicians transfer, or they ask their former campaign managers to run their super PACs while they're still sharing vacation homes. And so it sort of showed us the fine line between coordinated and uncoordinated activity. The attorney did explain to us that we had to create two separate teams, those of us that were working on the show and those of us that were working on the actual campaign. And so we wore different colored T-shirts and we closed our doors and we listened very strongly when they said that even our television version could cause us great fines and jail time if we did it all wrong. One of my favorite stories was a young brother and sister said, we wrote a letter to the show and said, Stephen, we would like to start a lemonade stand to raise money for your PAC, but our mother did tell us that we should really find out what the PAC stands for. And to which Stephen said on air, very honestly, I have no idea. And thus was born but he did say that I do know that turtles do not like peanut butter, and that was born our T-shirt and slogan. So what this all says is that, if you're willing to take risks, which we were, and you're willing to say yes, then people will say yes back to you. Of course, sometimes you have to say no, but I only say no when it is allowing me to say yes to something else. I really believe that saying yes is not about pleasing other people. It is about pleasing yourself. Ultimately, I just really hope that all of you will just at least once when you're thinking about saying no, say yes. And I've seen it impact my life and have a very powerful and positive influence. And also it's had an influence on those around me. I convinced my best friend a couple of years ago to compete in her first triathlon. And it was very powerful when I was standing on the beach next to her, and she was literally wiping away tears. And she was afraid of swimming in the open water, but she dove into this very swampy lake and competed the race and really conquered all of her fears. My older son, a number of years ago, was asked to step in as the goalie in a lacrosse tournament, and he had never played the position before. And he did so, and he said yes, and he gained the respect of his teammates, and he's been playing the position ever since and plans to play in college. And my 11-year-old son, a couple weeks ago, while on vacation, decided to ride a bull. We watched the professionals in the bull ring compete, and then they turned to the crowd and they said, would anyone like to try this for the first time? And so to my surprise, my 11-year-old raised his hand, put on a helmet, and went down into the ring in front of hundreds of people and climbed onto the back of this young calf and to try his luck, knowing that he would be thrown off into the dirt. So I tell you this because, to me, it's what life is all about. It's about learning, it's about growing, and it's about doing. George Bernard Shaw once said that a life spent making mistakes is not only more honorable, but it is more useful than a life spent doing nothing. So I just ask that you say yes to everything you possibly can. And that is from helping a friend move, to writing the play that you always wanted to write, to taking your television show overseas, or to riding a scary bull. And if you're lucky, the world will say back to you, yes, with pleasure, joy, and approval. Thank you.